A peaceful Midwestern community is rocked by a tragic murder.
There was a gunshot wound to the head.
I just remember laying down and crying.
My heart had been ripped out. I couldn't believe that this was happening. Who would want to hurt it?
As authorities search for a suspect, the investigation descends into the dangers of online dating.
He said he was going to go meet up with some guy on Grindr.
You don't know who you're meeting up with. It was a big fear.
Was this a date that went bad? Was this a set-up date as a robbery? Lots of questions.
The investigation will take a sharp turn as rumors of a toxic romance come into focus, leading to the discovery of a disturbing betrayal fueled by desperation.
They punished him to protect themselves.
They needed each other to survive.
I still cannot wrap my mind around how you could be so close to somebody and do something so horrific.
A quiet community south of Indianapolis, Morgan County, Indiana, may be best known for its family-friendly living.
Morgan County is a small rural area, about 30 minutes south of Indianapolis. It's a peaceful, quaint community with not a lot of crime.
But at 3 p.m. on September 13, 2019, a local resident calls 911 in a panic.
We've been smelling something for a couple of days here, and we just thought it was a dead animal, but there's a dead person laying up here in the ditch.
The caller reports the victim is lying along a fence adjoining her property.
And you're for sure that that person is deceased, right?
Oh yes, there was bugs crawling around him.
There's officers on the way. They're going to be there in just a few minutes, okay?
Investigators with the Morgan County Sheriff's Office are immediately dispatched to the scene.
I was on call, so I proceeded to the location. This particular area was isolated. It had one residence right off the road, and the area was shaded by trees and thick brush. The deceased person was in late stages of decomposition. When we looked at the body, it was difficult to even tell if it was male or female. There was a gunshot wound to the head. And I've noticed that the deceased's right pocket was pulled out. So that automatically had us leading to believe a possible robbery.
Most people carry cell phones. Most people have some kind of ID or credit card or money. So the fact that there was really nothing there led police to believe that maybe that was intended.
As we started looking at the scene, we found 7 9mm shell casings. We determined that it was an automatic handgun and possibly a Glock due to the indentions on the shell casings.
There was some blood found coming from the top of the fence to the bottom. There was some blood found on the rocks below the fence. It was the hypothesis or assumption at the time that the victim was going over the fence and then was shot.
When investigators speak with the 911 caller, she says she hadn't seen anything suspicious, but she had heard something 4 days earlier.
She had gone to sleep on September 9th at 4:30 and heard several gunshots. But it was a rural area, so there's a lot of target practicing and hunting, different people in that area shooting guns off, so it wasn't uncommon.
With no clear evidence pointing to who might be responsible, investigators focus on identifying their victim.
The body was transported to our Morgan County morgue, and then forensic pathologist did an autopsy on the deceased the next day. The forensic pathologist determined that it was a male, probably in their 20s, approximately 6'2", 6'3",
The pathologist confirms the victim died from a single gunshot wound to the head.
They couldn't say exactly when, but they just know the body had been out there for a few days. We also were able to get fingerprints from the deceased at the autopsy, and those were put into what's called APHIS. We got a hit on the fingerprint for a male out of Jacksonville, Illinois, named Alexander Jackson.
The Morgan County Sheriff's Office, they were asking themselves questions like, what was this guy doing out here? And why was he killed?
Born in Illinois in 1996, Alexander Jackson had always been bright and brainy.
Alex was born and raised in Jacksonville. He was a good kid, and he was really, really smart.
Alex was very outgoing, caring, bubbly. I mean, when you think of somebody that would literally give you the shirt off their back, I mean, that is him to a T.
He loves science. Everything with plants, trees. He would always hate seeing people cut trees down and everything. He always just wanted to do what he could to help the environment.
We called him Sid the science kid, because he would have all these facts that no one, why do you know that? You know?
When he graduated high school, he then decided to go to Western University in Illinois to study environmental science.
One day, his sophomore year of college, I guess there's a coming out day, he had posted this post. It said that I was gay.
He just really figured out who he wanted to be, what he wanted to do, and we were all just really proud of that.
After sophomore year, Alex decided to join his aunt in Indianapolis.
Alex moved in with me January of 2017. He wanted to come here to spread his wings. I was the person who kind of just introduced him to the scene, the gay scene, on Mass Ave.
He did drag and things like that, and he was having a lot of fun with that.
In July 2017, he decided he wanted to get his own apartment. And I was kind of sad when he decided to leave, because I really enjoyed having him around. But I was happy that he was finding his way in life.
But Alex's plans for the future would come to a tragic end on an isolated stretch of road nearly 20 miles from home in Indianapolis.
Once they got Alex identified, then the detective would reach out to the family.
I was able to get in contact with Alex's mother, Lilona Jackson.
I remember them telling me that they had found him. That moment is kind of a blur. Because I was there by myself, I just remember laying down and crying.
I think I dropped to the floor. Felt like the part of my soul, my heart had been ripped out. I couldn't believe that this was happening. Who would want to hurt him?
I learned that Alex had moved to Indianapolis to live with his aunt, Heather. He was taking classes there and working a job and doing really good for the most part.
Alex's mother says her son's life had taken an unexpected turn after he moved out of his aunt's home in July of 2017.
He lived in an apartment complex, and something had happened above him. And so water had leaked into his apartment, and he ended up needing to leave.
Talking to Lilona, he was actually staying with friends at different places and hotels. And I think that kind of got him in a situation where he was getting with the wrong people. He had quit his job and had quit school and had started to hang around some people that were partying a little too hard.
Alex called me and voiced some concern about the people that he had been hanging out with and that he had been doing things that maybe he shouldn't have been. He knew he needed to stop. It was quite a shock.
Coming up, a chilling discovery leads investigators to uncover a bitter conflict between friends.
He made a cryptic Facebook post in which he tagged Alex and said, "robbing the dead."
That post sounded very awful, especially the timing.
But a deeper look at Alex's dating life suggests a more sinister motive.
Anytime you're dealing with one of these dating apps, there's a concern that you don't know who you're dealing with. And unfortunately, there could be predators out there.
Investigators have identified 23-year-old Alex Jackson as the murder victim found off a rural road in Morgan County, Indiana. And law enforcement has learned that Alex's family had become concerned about him in recent months.
There was about a month or two there that I'm not sure exactly what happened, but things went downhill quickly. You know, the people he hung out with, I didn't know them. I knew his friends before, and all of a sudden, things changed.
These people, I had no clue who they were. No clue.
While Alex's family is unable to name any of Alex's new friends, they can offer investigators helpful insight.
Alex's car actually was in the shop, so he needed a rental car. And this family friend offered to get him a rental car for 4 days. And after that 4 days, they're like, well, why wasn't the rental car returned?
It was a short-term rental that would have been on September 6th. On the 10th, that rental car was not returned. They didn't know where the car was.
Investigators immediately begin the search for the vehicle, a 2018 Hyundai Elantra. They also issue a press release hoping to identify Alex's new friends in the city.
It's important to know who was the last person to talk to him or had seen them. We were trying to locate names as far as who he hung out with and where he might have been. And with the press release, we had gotten a call from one of Alex's friends who gave us some information on who he had been hanging out with at the time.
One of the names mentioned was Chad.
According to the tipster, Chad had made an alarming post on social media on September 6th, 3 days before authorities believe Alex was killed.
On September 6th, Chad made a cryptic Facebook post in which he tagged Alex and said something to the effect of, "robbing the dead."
They were concerned about the post due to the fact that Alex was deceased.
That post sounded very awful, especially the timing.
So at that time, we locate Chad and we went and spoke with him.
When investigators confront Chad about the social media post, he alleges that Alex was the thief in question, not him.
Chad said that him and Alex were friends and that Alex had actually stayed with him for a while and that him and Alex had a falling out due to the fact that Alex might have taken some items from him.
Chad claims that the alleged theft occurred after the two friends partied together on September 6th.
Chad had bought some drugs and had used the drugs and had nearly overdosed. When he woke up, his money was gone and he blamed Alex for taking it. So he stated that he posted that due to the fact that he was robbing him while he was almost dying. So that was his explanation for the post.
The situation had bothered Chad, but he's emphatic that he didn't kill Alex.
We have a software that we use that actually can show which towers in an area that cell phones had sent data to. And when our evidence tech ran those numbers through, we found that Chad's number at the morning of the homicide was far away from the crime scene.
Cleared of any connection to Alex's death, Chad suggests they talk to Alex's closest friend in Indianapolis.
He advised that there was another person that Alex hung on with on a regular basis named Brittany Overton.
Alex really trusted Brittany and kind of looked at her as maybe a big sister. She was older and looked up to her for guidance, protection, stability. Brittany's name came up, and that eventually led the investigators to pay a visit on Brittany.
We proceeded to her grandmother's house and we talked to Brittany.
This is Mark Anderson, working the Sheriff's Department.
Okay.
We are investigating Alex's death.
What happened to him?
He was shot and killed.
He was shot? I'm sorry. I can't.
She said she had been friends with Alex for a year or so, ran around with him on occasions and partied with him.
So had Alex ever lived with you or stayed with you, or did you ever live with him?
He never lived with me. He was talking about getting an apartment together.
Okay.
According to Brittany, the last time she saw Alex was the evening of September 8th, 2019.
She said they were driving around in a blue rental car that Alex had. They had gone to a couple stores during the day, and at 11 o'clock that night, he had dropped her off at her house.
Brittany puts herself with Alex together at her house in the blue rental car. Alex leaves at 11 p.m., was supposed to come back. He never came back. So now we're getting a lot closer to what happened to Alex the morning of the 9th, when the neighbors heard gunshots at 4:30 a.m.
So we're not sure exactly who he was with or where he was at from 11 p.m. to 4 a.m.
He said he was going to go meet up with some guy on Grindr.
Grindr is an app where men can meet other men.
Did he say who that guy was?
No name. Like, okay, well, be careful, come back if you want to, because he didn't have a place to stay at the point in time.
I was concerned maybe he met up with somebody on Grindr and that something had happened, and that we really wanted to find out who he met up with at that time.
Was this a date that went bad? Was this a set-up date as a robbery? Lots of questions.
1 week after the body of Alex Jackson was discovered, his friend Brittany Overton has just told investigators that Alex planned to meet up with a Grindr date the night of September 8th, the last time anyone saw Alex alive.
Brittany said that he was meeting or talking to a male on a dating app. If it's true, Alex was with Brittany at 11 p.m. the night before he was killed, and he went on a Grindr date. How did this person come into play?
Anytime you're dealing with one of these dating apps, there's a concern that you don't know who you're dealing with. And unfortunately, there could be predators out there.
Detective Mark Anderson immediately obtains a search warrant for Alex's personal Grindr account.
When I got the information back from the dating app, it just gave me the username and when they would log in or log off. It didn't give me any names who they talked to. It didn't give me any names that they hooked up with or anything like that.
That reached a dead end. A lot of these dating sites are very discreet for the obvious reason.
But just as the investigation hits a roadblock, authorities receive crucial information that breathes new life into the case.
Alex's rental car was found by Indianapolis police, abandoned.
The rental car was found wrecked on a road in Indianapolis. The theory then is the people that killed Alex may have been the same people in the rental car when it was wrecked. So we did search warrants on the rental car.
When we got the vehicle back, we noticed that in the passenger seat, there was a set of keys. And we realized there was a car key to Buick.
The keys to the rental car were there, but this extra set of keys was significant to investigators because it led them to wonder, who did these belong to?
Also, interestingly about the rental car, the front plate of the radio was removed and the radio was actually pulled out. And we were able to recover some very good fingerprints of the right hand of an individual on top of the radio. Detectives, evidence technicians processed for evidence, and of course it doesn't come back right away. So we're waiting on DNA, we're waiting on fingerprints.
While investigators wait on forensics, weeks pass without any new leads.
For the first several weeks, investigators didn't really have a lot to go on. They were reaching out to anyone who might have known Alex in the Indianapolis area. Unfortunately, they really weren't able to get any answers.
Five weeks after Alex's death, investigators receive a promising tip from a concerned woman.
And we went and spoke with her. She stated that her grandson had told her that he had shot somebody named Alex. He then showed her on his phone an article from a local television station where Alex Jackson was identified as deceased in a homicide. She had asked him why, and he had made a comment that he thought that this person was going to try to hurt him. She gave me the name of Justin Blake. I had never heard that name in the investigation.
Justin's grandmother explains that 18-year-old Justin had had a tumultuous upbringing.
Justin grew up in Indianapolis, and at a very young age, his sister and him were taken from the biological parents through Department of Child Services and spent some time in foster care, and he was adopted at one point in time. Justin had gotten into some trouble and had gotten incarcerated as a juvenile. It was too hard for them to take care of him, so they kind of washed their hands of him, and he went to the system.
Justin lived on and off on the streets. By the time he was 18, a fairly hardened individual, which is really sad.
Six months earlier, Justin had reconnected with his grandmother.
Grandma treated him with love, was concerned about his appearance, concerned about who he was hanging around with, but still, as a grandmother's love would be, what can I do for you? And Justin bared his soul and basically told Grandma that he'd killed somebody.
She was still in shock that he had said this to her, but she knew she was trying to do the right thing, so she gave that information.
Investigators know they need to speak with Justin immediately.
She told me he was at the Hendricks County Jail in October of 2019, that he had gotten arrested for having a stolen van and a stolen gun. And she was concerned that possibly that maybe that gun was involved in the case.
We had then a good belief that this person was a viable suspect in Alex's killing.
And that's when I went to the Hendricks County Jail and spoke to Justin. Justin, how you doing? I'm Mark Anderson with Morgan County Sheriff's Department. This is Dean Minton. Okay. And first thing is, we're not here, we don't care what you were in here for. Yeah, absolutely don't care. Okay, we're here for something else. And you go back to your cell anytime. You don't have to talk to us. I advised him that I was here to speak to him about a homicide.
What I asked who the homicide is?
A man named Alex Jackson.
Alex Jackson.
And it wasn't until a short time later he stated, "Oh yeah, I know Alex."
Because I have only met him 2 times.
Investigators inform Justin an anonymous tip has implicated the teen in Alex's murder.
So why would your name come up in this homicide?
I don't know, sir.
I mean, did they specifically mention your name?
I mean, I have a bad reputation because I've been locked up.
Okay. You not shot anybody?
No, sir.
Okay. You didn't tell anybody you did?
No, sir.
He tried to explain that he only met Alex twice, and he tried to brush it off that he didn't really know him.
When asked how he met Alex, Justin tells investigators they were introduced through Justin's girlfriend.
What's the girl's name?
Brittany.
Brittany what?
Overton.
When I heard that, then it started clicking together that the two names were connected. Brittany and Justin.
Over a month after the shooting death of Alex Jackson, investigators in Morgan County, Indiana, have zeroed in on Justin Blake as the primary person of interest. When Justin reveals he was introduced to Alex by Alex's friend, Brittany Overton.
Investigators made the connection that Justin knew Brittany. In fact, the two had a relationship for some time. And add that to the fact that investigators were told by Justin's grandmother that Justin had confessed to killing Alex. These were strong pieces of evidence.
Justin was pretty much saying he's not involved. I don't know why you're here.
However, Justin does admit to being with Brittany and Alex on September 8th, the evening investigators believe Alex was killed.
Justin started to tell a story very similar to Brittany, that he saw Alex that night. Alex had a date on the dating app, and that Alex left in a blue rental car at 11 p.m. and never came back.
So you met Alex. What Alex? He said that Alex dropped him off at the house. He never saw Alex after that. I just don't think you're giving me all the information.
I gave you all the information that I know.
We didn't talk to him much longer after that because we wanted to make sure we had another shot to talk to him.
While Justin is escorted back to his jail cell, investigators focus on the stolen weapon found in his possession during his recent arrest.
I then called the arresting officer in that case to confirm what kind of weapon that he was charged with. He had a revolver in his possession at the time, so it didn't match the shell casings that we found at the scene, due to the fact the revolver doesn't spin out shell casings.
They weren't able to find the murder weapon, so they strongly suspected that Justin had dumped the weapon shortly after the murder.
Still, investigators have no idea what motive Justin would have, or what role Brittany Overton might have played in the crime. Before circling back to Brittany, they focus their efforts on developing evidence against her.
So we did search warrants of social media, cell phone records, cell phone tower locations, anything that we could to either include or exclude someone as a suspect.
Brittany had clearly kept some interesting company.
There was some involvement in the drug community. Not terrible, but enough that she was on probation. We learned that Brittany met Justin Blake through a drug dealer. They had the same dealer.
Once I got the Facebook records for Brittany Overton, you can see that she's hanging with Justin a lot as a couple in pictures. Brittany and Justin did have a sexual relationship with each other. He had a bad guy persona about him already, and he was only 18 at the time.
I think in looking at some of the social media, she had a bad boy crush on him. There was some comment that all they've been through, they had a bond, like a band of brothers, thick as thieves type of bond.
When I'm going through her accounts, I'm finding conversations with her and other subjects in the criminal world. Just days prior to the homicide, she's actually talking to people about wanting to get a gun.
Investigators are unable to determine if Brittany had acquired a gun. But as they continue analyzing her social media data and usage, they come to a startling realization.
Neighbors heard gunshots at around 4:30 a.m. on the morning of September 9th, which is believed to be the time that Alex was killed. And then at 4:45 a.m., Brittany logged onto her Facebook account and she unfriended Alex.
That stuck in our mind really hard. It was exactly 15 minutes after the homicide that she defriends Alex Jackson.
Once we had that foundation, then when those cell records came back, her cell phone put her in the area of North Man Road, very close to where Alex was killed at 4:31 a.m. on September 9th.
Investigators have the evidence they need to secure a warrant for Brittany's arrest. When they receive the forensic analysis on Alex's rental car, the case becomes more than circumstantial.
We sent a copy of Justin Blake's fingerprints to the state lab with the fingerprint that we found on the radio. They called back and confirmed it was a match to his fingerprints. So that places him in the vehicle. The DNA results on the keys, those DNA results came back to Brittany Overton.
The DNA, the phone records, all kind of put Justin there, Brittany there. There didn't seem to be any obvious motive, but it was time to roll up our sleeves, file the charges, and get arrest warrants for Justin Blake and Brittany Overton.
On October 3rd, 2020, more than a year after Alex Jackson's murder, police take Justin Blake and Brittany Overton into custody.
Justin had been in Hendricks County Jail for stealing a car and having a gun in his possession. But at that point, Justin had been released from jail.
Justin was in Indianapolis with a new girlfriend, and he was located at her residence. Brittany was found inside Indianapolis city limits. Hi, Justin. You remember me?
Investigators sit down with Justin first and confront him with the evidence stacked against him.
So why would I just kill somebody?
Well, I don't know. Why would you? Was there something gone wrong? Do you have dope you wanted to buy?
Was there a fight?
Was there a fight?
No, sir.
He just denied it the whole time and said the same story he said before. He was given a voice stress test. He agreed to take one, and of course he failed it. After that, he pretty much said, I want to talk to a lawyer. Hey, Brittany.
Detectives next turn their attention to Brittany.
I think you want to get it off your chest of what happened and get justice for Alex.
I'm confused.
About?
So, you're saying that I'm associated with it because I witnessed it.
Did you witness it?
No, I'm saying, like, this is what he's saying.
Brittany, for 2 hours, played innocent.
We know you were there, 100%. When Alex died, you were there. There's no doubt in our mind.
And it wasn't until the detectives talked about that her phone records put her at the scene. There was no way she wasn't there.
These are all locations where your phone is pinging. That's the exact time Alex was killed, and you're all over here.
I think she finally realized, well, let's tell this story and see what happens. And then she gave a story of what happened that night.
All those pieces of the puzzle fell into place as we had planned.
Indiana authorities have arrested Brittany Overton and Justin Blake for the murder of Brittany's friend, Alex Jackson. While Justin continues to maintain his innocence, Brittany eventually cracks under the pressure.
Brittany told them that on the night of September 8th, Alex had picked her up in his rental car
Brittany said Alex and her was running around, and at some point in time in the night, they picked Justin up.
They were driving around, partying a bit, and at a certain point, Justin suggested they go try to make some fast money.
They get Alex to contact a guy from Grindr, and they set up a date to meet him, and they were going to rob him.
According to Brittany, when the trio arrived at the apartment complex, Justin forced Alex to accompany him to the front door.
I sat in the car. They ended up going inside.
Brittany stated that when they met the guy, Justin started pistol whipping him. Brittany said that Alex didn't expect them to beat him up and be that violent.
So they went back in and robbed him. What'd they come out with? Do you know?
I came out with some credit cards, an Xbox, I believe, or it was a PlayStation, it was one, and maybe a checkbook.
Brittany claims the trio partied for the next several hours, but Alex became increasingly upset about what had happened.
Alex has never seen this kind of stuff before. He's not a criminal. That must have been a shock.
He was kind of regretting doing the robberies and stuff and was talking about it.
There was a concern that Alex would snitch on them.
And they ended up on this road. And at that time, then Justin supposedly tells her to stop the car.
What do you mean, stop the car? He's like, stop the car. And he's got a gun, and it's held right here to my head. At that point in time, I was scared.
When she stopped the car, he then made the comment, Alex, you know it's time. And at that time, she says, Alex looks over at her and said, what's going on, Brittany?
I'm freaking out. He said, Brittany, what's going on? I was like, I don't know. And we're both pretty hysterical at that time. So Justin gets out of the car and pulls Alex out of the car.
Justin gets out with the gun in his hand, and she proceeds to look straight ahead and hear several gunshots.
Hear Alex screaming, anything like that?
Yeah, dude. It's just like a scared kind of scream and gunshots.
And then Justin gets in the front seat of the car. He had the gun in his hand and Alex's cell phone. And Justin drops her off and says, don't say anything to anybody or you're going to die. And then he drives off and leaves.
Investigators aren't buying Brittany's story. If Brittany was afraid of Justin, she certainly didn't seem to show it in the days after the murder.
Brittany admitted to police that they used the rental car for 2 days after the murder.
He had it hid for a couple days.
Okay, and then came back and got you?
Yeah.
She said that her and Justin were drinking and that he ran off the road and hit the tree.
So you were in the car when the car was wrecked, right?
Yeah.
So I'm seeing now that she's more of a manipulative person, and you can see where she's doing anything she can to survive.
While Justin continues to deny any involvement, investigators have what they need to file charges.
We charged Justin Blake with murder and felony murder. Murder for shooting Alex, felony murder for stealing the car. We charged Brittany Overton only with, felony murder and robbery. We did not believe that she pulled the trigger.
I didn't know anything about Brittany, but I just needed whoever was responsible to pay for it. They took my baby for no reason.
After the arrests were made, the family was happy. Lalana was happy. My brother was happy. But now comes trial.
With Brittany's testimony and a mountain of physical and digital evidence in tow, prosecutors take Justin's case to a jury in February of 2022. While prosecutors don't need to prove motive as an element of their case, they believe they know why Alex was killed that night.
Alex fell in with the wrong crowd. He certainly wasn't hardened like Brittany and Justin. Ultimately, Alex was caught up in their crimes, and as soon as he showed a sign of weakness, they punished him for that, to protect themselves.
Obviously, they were intimate. They found some attraction to each other. I think it became a bond of what they did together that night, and then a bond of how they thought they could get away with it.
Despite Justin's defense team attempting to shift blame solely to Brittany, on February 24, 2022, the jury sides with the prosecution.
The jury convicted Justin of all counts: murder, felony murder, and robbery. We proceeded to sentencing, and the judge gave him 61 years.
In May 2022, Brittany Overton accepts a plea bargain.
The judge did credit her for testifying in Justin's trial. The judge ended up giving her 20 years with 17 and a half to do.
Brittany teared up a little bit, but I didn't think she was very remorseful.
I still cannot wrap my mind around how you could be so close to somebody like Alex and do something so horrific. I just will never understand why.
They took an amazing person, and that was part of the problem. He was so trusting and befriended people because he saw the good in everyone.
There are moments in history that do not announce themselves as significant when they begin. Moments that unfold quietly, almost invisibly, before revealing the weight they will carry for years to come. And in 1993, in London, one such moment began with something entirely ordinary: a young man standing at a bus stop, waiting to go home. There was nothing remarkable about the scene, nothing that would have drawn attention from those passing by. The rhythm of the city moved as it always did, people coming and going, routines continuing without interruption. The quiet assumption that the familiar patterns of daily life would hold. At the center of that moment was Stephen Lawrence, just 18 years old, a young man whose presence in that place at that time was defined by nothing more than the expectation of returning home safely. It is precisely this ordinariness that gives the moment its enduring power. Because what followed did not emerge from conflict, did not escalate from an argument, and did not arise from any visible warning. It arrived suddenly, without invitation, and with a force that would transform not only a single life, but the way an entire nation would come to understand justice, accountability, and the systems meant to uphold them. The attack itself, as it would later be described, was swift and unprovoked. A group of individuals approached, and within moments, the situation shifted from stillness to violence. There was no theft, no attempt to conceal motive behind opportunism. Instead, the nature of the act pointed towards something more deliberate, something rooted not in circumstance, but in intention. It is here that the narrative begins to expand beyond the immediate event. Because the killing of Stephen Lawrence was not only an act of physical violence, it was an act shaped by hatred, one that carried implications far beyond the location in which it occurred. In the immediate aftermath, the scene would have appeared as many crime scenes do: sudden, disorienting, marked by the absence of what had just been lost. But what distinguishes this case is not only the brutality of the act, but the questions that followed. How could such violence occur in a public space without warning? How could a young man, engaged in an ordinary act, become the target of something so deliberate? And perhaps most significantly, what would happen next? Because in many cases, the story that follows a crime is one of investigation leading to resolution, of questions answered through process and procedure. But this case would not follow that path in any straightforward way. Instead, it would become a prolonged and deeply complex journey, one in which the search for answers would expose not only the individuals responsible, but the systems tasked with responding to such acts. The night in 1993 did not end with the act itself. It extended into something far larger, something that would challenge assumptions about fairness, efficiency, and equality within the justice system of the United Kingdom. As the details began to emerge, it became clear that this was not an isolated incident in the way many violent acts are initially perceived. The identification of a racial motive placed the case within a broader context, connecting it to ongoing conversations about prejudice and the realities faced by individuals within society. This connection transformed the narrative, shifting it from a singular event to a reflection of deeper structural issues. It is important to recognize that this transformation did not happen instantly. At first, there was only the shock of what had occurred, the immediate awareness that a life had been taken without reason. But as time passed, and as the investigation unfolded, the case began to reveal layers that extended beyond the surface. Each layer brought with it new questions, and each question pointed toward a system that would be tested in ways it had not anticipated. The story of Stephen Lawrence, therefore, begins not only with the violence of that night, but with the silence that followed, the pause between what happened and what would be understood about it. It is within that silence that the true weight of the case begins to form, because it is there that uncertainty takes hold, that assumptions are challenged, and that the path toward justice becomes less clear. For those who would later follow the case, this opening moment serves as both a starting point and a point of reference. It is the moment against which all subsequent developments are measured, the point at which the narrative shifts from ordinary to extraordinary. And yet, even as the case grew in significance, the simplicity of that initial scene remained central to its impact. A young man waiting for a bus, a moment of stillness interrupted, a life altered beyond recovery. These are not complex images, but they carry a depth that resonates precisely because of their simplicity. They remind us that the most significant events often begin in the most unremarkable ways, and that the distance between normalcy and tragedy can be far smaller than we expect. As we move forward into the details of the case, into the investigation, the failures, the persistence, and the eventual outcomes, it is essential to hold onto that initial moment, not as a distant memory, but as the foundation upon which everything else is built. Because without understanding what was lost, it becomes impossible to fully understand what followed. And in the case of Stephen Lawrence, what followed would become one of the most consequential and revealing journeys toward justice in modern British history. To understand the full weight of what happened in 1993 in London, it is necessary to begin not with the violence itself, but with the life that was interrupted by it. Because the story of Stephen Lawrence is not defined solely by the way it ended, but by the normalcy that preceded it, a normalcy that makes the rupture all the more profound. At 18 years old, Stephen Lawrence stood at a threshold that is both familiar and universal, a stage of life marked by expectation, by movement forward, by the quiet assumption that the future is something to be entered rather than something to be denied. And it is within this context that his presence at a bus stop on that evening must be understood, not as a moment of risk, but as an ordinary act embedded in the routine structure of daily life. There was no indication, no visible sign, that the space he occupied carried any unusual danger. And this absence of warning is central to the emotional gravity of the case, because it reinforces the idea that what occurred was not the result of escalation or conflict, but an intrusion, an abrupt and irreversible break in a sequence of events that should have continued without interruption. The significance of this cannot be overstated, because when violence emerges without context, it destabilizes the assumptions that allow individuals to navigate public spaces with a sense of security. And in this instance, that destabilization would extend far beyond the immediate moment, shaping how the case was perceived and remembered across the United Kingdom. The broader context of early 1990s Britain is essential to understanding why the case resonated so deeply, because it was a period in which conversations about race and social cohesion were already present, even if they were not always fully articulated or addressed within institutional frameworks. And the identification of a racial motive in the killing of Stephen Lawrence brought those conversations into sharper focus, transforming what might otherwise have been seen as an isolated act of violence into something that reflected underlying tensions within society. This transformation did not occur in abstraction. It was grounded in the recognition that the circumstances of the attack, its suddenness, its lack of provocation, and its clear targeting pointed toward a form of hostility that could not be explained by chance or misunderstanding. And it is within this recognition that the case began to take on a symbolic dimension, one that connected the experience of a single individual to a broader pattern of concern. Yet it is important to maintain clarity here, because while the case became emblematic of larger issues, it remains rooted in the specific loss of a single life. And it is this dual nature, both individual and collective, that gives it its enduring impact. On one level, it is the story of a young man whose life was cut short in an act of violence that should never have occurred. On another, it is a reflection of the conditions that allowed such an act to take place and the responses that followed. These two levels are not separate, they are intertwined, each informing the other in ways that shape the narrative as a whole. The environment in which Stephen Lawrence lived and moved was not defined by constant danger. And that is precisely what makes the event so striking, because it disrupts the expectation that harm can be anticipated or avoided through awareness, suggesting instead that vulnerability can exist even in moments that appear entirely routine. This realization has a lasting effect because it challenges the boundaries between safety and risk, between ordinary experience and extraordinary outcome. It forces a reconsideration of how public spaces are understood and how individuals relate to them, particularly in contexts where underlying social tensions may not always be visible but can manifest in sudden and devastating ways. At the same time, the case highlights the importance of perception, how events are interpreted in the moment, and how those interpretations evolve over time. In the immediate aftermath, the focus is often on what has happened, on the facts as they are known and the actions that must be taken in response. But as the narrative develops, those facts begin to take on additional meaning, shaped by the context in which they are placed and the questions that arise from them. In the case of Stephen Lawrence, the recognition of a racial motive added a layer of significance that extended beyond the immediate act, prompting reflection on the broader social environment and the ways in which it influences both behavior and response. This reflection is not static. It evolves as new information emerges and as perspectives shift, but it remains anchored in the initial reality of what occurred. The victim, therefore, is not only a figure within a sequence of events, but the central point around which those events are understood. And maintaining that focus is essential to preserving the integrity of a narrative. It ensures that the discussion does not drift into abstraction or lose sight of the human impact. That gives the case its meaning. In examining the context of this case, it is also necessary to consider the role of expectation. What people believe is likely to happen in a given situation and how those beliefs shape their reactions. The expectation that a young man waiting for a bus is safe is not unreasonable. It is a reflection of the norms that govern everyday life. And it is precisely because this expectation is so widely shared that its violation carries such weight. When that expectation is broken, it does more than create a single instance of harm. It introduces uncertainty into a system of assumptions that people rely on to navigate the world. And that uncertainty can have far-reaching effects, influencing not only how individuals perceive risk, but how institutions respond to it. The story of Stephen Lawrence, therefore, is not only about the events of a single evening, but about the broader framework within which those events occurred. A framework that includes social dynamics, institutional practices, and the collective understanding of safety and responsibility. As the case moves forward into its next stages, the incident itself, the investigation, and the long path toward accountability, this context remains essential because it provides the lens through which each development is interpreted. It reminds us that what happened did not occur in isolation, but within a specific environment that both shaped and was shaped by the events that followed. And it reinforces the central truth that at the heart of every case, regardless of its complexity or its broader implications, there's a life that was lived, a future that was anticipated, and a moment at which that future was taken away. On that evening in 1993 in London, the sequence of events that would later define the case unfolded with a speed and simplicity that made it all the more difficult to comprehend. Because there was no gradual escalation, no visible progression from tension to conflict, only a sudden and irreversible shift from ordinary routine to lethal violence. And at the center of that moment was Stephen Lawrence, standing at a bus stop, engaged in an act so familiar that it rarely invites attention, waiting for transportation, anticipating nothing more than the continuation of an uneventful evening. The setting itself offered no indication of what was about to occur, and this absence of warning is essential to understanding the nature of the incident, because it underscores the fact that the violence did not arise from circumstance but was introduced into it, imposed upon a moment that, by all reasonable expectations, should have remained uneventful. The arrival of a group of individuals marked the beginning of that shift, but even then, there was no immediate signal that the situation would escalate into something fatal. And it is precisely this lack of visible transition that makes the event so stark. Because the movement from presence to action happened almost instantaneously, collapsing what might have been a series of steps into a single, decisive act. The attack, as described within the known details, was both sudden and brief, characterized by its lack of provocation and its absence of any conventional motive, such as theft or personal dispute. And this combination of factors distinguishes it from many other forms of violence, because it removes the possibility of interpreting the event as a reaction to circumstance, instead pointing toward an intention that existed independently of the immediate environment. There was no argument to resolve, no object to obtain, no prior interaction that could be examined for clues. There was only the act itself, carried out with a directness that left little room for ambiguity about its purpose. The presence of a racial motive further clarifies this purpose, situating the attack within a framework of hostility that extends beyond the individual and into the broader social context. And it is this element that transforms the incident from a singular act of violence into something that resonates on a wider scale. Because it reflects not only the actions of those directly involved, but also the conditions that allow such actions to occur. Yet even as the incident takes on this broader significance, it remains grounded in the specific reality of what happened in that moment. A reality defined by its immediacy and its finality. The speed with which the attack unfolded meant that there was little opportunity for intervention, little time for the situation to be recognized and altered. And this compression of time contributes to the sense of inevitability that often accompanies retrospective analysis. Even though, in the moment, nothing about the event would have appeared predetermined, it is important to resist the temptation to impose a narrative of inevitability. However, because doing so risks obscuring the fact that the event was contingent, the result of choices made by individuals rather than an unavoidable outcome. Recognizing this contingency is essential because it reinforces the understanding that the violence was not an abstract occurrence, but a concrete action with identifiable responsibility. The outcome of the attack was severe and irreversible. Stephen Lawrence sustained injuries that led to his death, and with that, the moment of violence extended into a lasting reality, one that would shape everything that followed. The transition from incident to consequence is immediate in such cases, but the implications of that transition unfold over time, influencing not only the individuals directly affected, but also the systems and communities that respond to the event. In the immediate aftermath, the focus would have been on the physical reality of what had occurred, the recognition that a life had been taken and that the circumstances surrounding that loss required investigation. But even at this early stage, the elements that would later define the case were already present. The absence of provocation, the clarity of motive, and the public nature of the attack. These elements would shape the direction of the investigation and the interpretation of the event, providing a framework within which subsequent developments would be understood. The incident, therefore, is not only the starting point of the case in a chronological sense, but also the foundation upon which its meaning is constructed. It establishes the parameters of the narrative, defining the questions that must be asked and the issues that must be addressed. Why did this happen? How could it occur in such a setting? What does it reveal about the environment in which it took place? These questions arise directly from the characteristics of the incident, and they continue to influence the way the case is perceived long after the immediate details have been established. At the same time, it is important to maintain a clear distinction between what is known and what is inferred. The known details provide a concise but powerful account. A young man waiting for a bus, approached by a group, subjected to a sudden and unprovoked attack motivated by racial hatred, resulting in his death. This sequence, though brief, contains all the essential elements of the incident, and it is within this sequence that the full weight of the event resides. Any further interpretation must remain anchored to these facts, because they represent the point at which the abstract becomes concrete, where the broader themes of the case, violence, prejudice, accountability, are grounded in a specific, irreversible reality. As the narrative moves beyond the incident and into the processes that followed, it is essential to retain a clear understanding of this moment, because it is the reference point against which all subsequent actions are measured. The investigation, the legal proceedings, and the broader societal response all derive their significance from the fact that this event occurred, and that it occurred in the way that it did, suddenly, without provocation, and with a motive that extends beyond the immediate context. In this sense, the incident is both a beginning and a constant, a moment that initiates the narrative and continues to define it. It is the point at which the ordinary was interrupted, the moment when expectation gave way to reality, and the instant in which a single act of violence became the catalyst for a case that would resonate far beyond its immediate circumstances. In the immediate aftermath of the killing of Stephen Lawrence in 1993, the focus shifted, as it always does in such cases, from the act itself to the mechanisms designed to respond to it. And in London, those mechanisms began to move into place with the expectation that they would follow a familiar trajectory. Evidence gathered, leads pursued, suspects identified, and ultimately, accountability established. Yet what unfolded in this case would challenge each of those assumptions in ways that were both gradual and deeply consequential, revealing not a single point of failure, but a pattern of deficiencies that would come to define the investigation as much as the crime itself. At the outset, the investigative process appeared to proceed along standard lines, with law enforcement initiating inquiries into the circumstances surrounding the attack. But almost immediately, issues began to emerge, subtle at first, yet significant in their cumulative effect, beginning with delays in the collection of evidence, a factor that in any investigation can have a profound impact. Because time is not a neutral element in such contexts, it erodes clarity, diminishes the availability of reliable information, and complicates the task of reconstructing events with precision. These delays were not isolated incidents, but part of a broader pattern in which the handling of information failed to meet the level of effectiveness required for a case of this nature. And as a result, opportunities that might have advanced the investigation were either missed or not fully pursued, creating gaps that would later prove difficult, if not impossible, to close. As the investigation progressed, attention began to focus on a number of individuals who were identified as potential suspects, a development that might ordinarily signal movement toward resolution, yet in this instance, the identification of suspects did not translate into decisive progress, largely because the evidentiary foundation necessary to support legal action was insufficient, weakened not only by the initial delays, but also by procedural shortcomings that affected the way in which information was collected, evaluated, and presented. These shortcomings did not exist in isolation. They interacted with one another, compounding their effects and creating a situation in which the case, despite the presence of identifiable leads, began to lose momentum. The absence of strong, coherent evidence meant that the investigative process could not advance in the way it was intended to, and as a result, the case entered a period of stagnation, a phase that is often less visible than the initial response, but no less significant, because it is during this time that the trajectory of a case can shift from one of potential resolution to one of prolonged uncertainty. For the family of Stephen Lawrence, this stagnation was not an abstract concept, but a lived reality, characterized by the growing awareness that the systems responsible for delivering justice were not functioning as expected. And it is at this point that the narrative of the case begins to expand beyond the formal structures of investigation to include the actions of those most directly affected by its outcome, refusing to accept the lack of progress as inevitable. The family undertook a sustained effort to keep the case in the public and institutional consciousness, consistently calling for accountability and pressing for a more thorough and effective response. And in doing so, they introduced a new dynamic into the investigative process, one in which external pressure began to influence internal actions. This pressure did not immediately resolve the deficiencies that had already taken hold, but it prevented the case from receding into obscurity, ensuring that it remained an active concern rather than a closed chapter. Over time, this persistence began to yield results, not in the form of immediate breakthroughs, but in the gradual recognition that the investigation required re-examination, that the processes initially applied had not achieved their intended purpose, and that a renewed effort was necessary to address the unresolved questions that remained at the core of the case. The decision to revisit the investigation marked a critical turning point, not because it guaranteed a different outcome, but because it acknowledged the existence of earlier failures and created the possibility of correcting them. A possibility that had not been present during the period of stagnation. This re-examination involved a reassessment of the available evidence, a reconsideration of the methods used to obtain and interpret it, in an effort to approach the case with a level of rigor that had previously been lacking. And while the details of this process are defined by the same constraints that shaped the initial investigation, limitations of evidence, the passage of time, and the complexities inherent in reconstructing past events, it nevertheless represented a shift in approach, one that would ultimately influence the direction of the case as it moved forward. Throughout this phase, the broader implications of the investigation became increasingly apparent, as the issues identified within this specific case began to be understood as indicative of larger systemic concerns, particularly in relation to the efficiency and effectiveness of investigative procedures and the potential influence of bias on decision-making processes. These implications extended beyond the immediate goal of resolving the case, prompting questions about how similar situations might be handled in the future and what changes might be necessary to prevent the recurrence of such failures. In this sense, the investigation of the killing of Stephen Lawrence became both a case study and a catalyst, highlighting the consequences of procedural shortcomings while also providing the impetus for reflection and reform. Yet, even as these broader considerations emerged, the central focus of the investigation remained the same: to determine responsibility for the act that had taken place and to establish a basis for accountability. And it is this dual focus on the specific and the systemic that defines the investigative phase of this case. It is a process marked not only by the pursuit of answers, but by the recognition of the obstacles that impede that pursuit. Obstacles that in this instance were not merely incidental, but integral to the way the case unfolded. The investigation, therefore, cannot be understood solely in terms of its intended function. It must also be examined in terms of its limitations, its missteps, and the ways in which those factors shape the outcome. In doing so, it becomes clear that the path from incident to resolution was neither direct nor assured, but rather a complex and often uncertain progression, influenced as much by what was not done as by what was. And it is within this complexity that the true nature of the case begins to emerge, revealing not only the challenges of addressing a single act of violence, but the broader difficulties inherent in ensuring that systems designed to deliver justice are capable of fulfilling that purpose under all circumstances. By the time the case of Stephen Lawrence reached the stage where legal accountability could once again be pursued, the passage of time had already become one of its defining features, shaping not only the evidentiary landscape, but also the expectations surrounding what justice could realistically achieve. And within United Kingdom, the reopening of the case carried with it a sense of both possibility and limitation. Because while it signaled that earlier failures were being addressed, it also underscored the reality that those failures could not be undone. The decision to revisit the case emerged from a recognition that the initial investigation had not fulfilled its purpose, that the combination of delayed evidence collection, procedural shortcomings, and missed opportunities had prevented the establishment of a sufficiently strong foundation for prosecution, and that without a renewed effort, the case would remain unresolved, defined more by its deficiencies than by its outcomes. As the process moved forward, the emphasis shifted toward re-examining the available evidence, considering it in light of the time that had passed and the lessons learned from earlier missteps. And this re-examination was not merely a repetition of previous efforts, but an attempt to approach the case with greater rigor and coherence, to identify connections that may have been overlooked, and to construct a narrative capable of withstanding the scrutiny of legal proceedings. This phase of the case highlights a critical aspect of the justice system: its capacity for revision. for acknowledging that earlier conclusions or lack thereof may not represent the final word, and for creating opportunities to pursue accountability even after significant delays. Yet it also reveals the challenges inherent in such efforts, because the passage of time introduces complications that cannot be entirely mitigated, affecting the availability and reliability of evidence, the clarity of recollection, and the overall strength of the case. Within the courtroom, these complexities became central to the proceedings, shaping the way in which arguments were presented and evaluated, and influencing the balance between the need for accountability and the requirement that any conviction be supported by evidence that meets the necessary legal standards. The narrative presented during this phase of the case was necessarily constrained by these factors, relying on what could be established rather than what might be inferred. And this distinction is crucial, because it underscores the principle that legal outcomes must be grounded in demonstrable facts, even in cases where the broader context suggests a clear direction. The eventual outcome, in which some of those responsible were convicted, represents a significant development, not only in terms of the case itself, but in terms of what it signifies about the persistence of the pursuit of justice, because it demonstrates that even when initial efforts fall short, continued examination and pressure can lead to meaningful results. Yet it is equally important to recognize that this outcome does not erase the earlier period of inaction, nor does it fully compensate for the time during which accountability was absent. The concept of delayed justice carries with it an inherent tension, because while it affirms that accountability has been achieved to some extent, it also acknowledges that the timing of that accountability has consequences, both for the individuals directly affected and for the broader perception of the system's effectiveness. For the family of Stephen Lawrence, the convictions represent a form of validation, a recognition that the loss they experienced has been formally acknowledged and that those responsible have been held to account. Yet this validation is accompanied by the awareness that it was not delivered in a timely manner, that it required sustained effort and persistence to achieve, and that it came after a prolonged period during which the system did not function as it should have. This duality is central to understanding the outcome of the case, because it reflects the complexity of measuring justice not only in terms of results, but in terms of process. And it raises questions about how success is defined in situations where the path to resolution is marked by significant shortcomings. Within the broader context of United Kingdom, the case serves as both an example of eventual accountability and a reminder of the importance of timely and effective investigation, illustrating that while the system is capable of correcting itself to some degree, such corrections are not without cost, and that the delay between incident and resolution can have lasting implications for public trust and confidence. The courtroom phase, therefore, is not simply the culmination of the case, but a reflection of its entire trajectory, encapsulating both the progress that has been made and the obstacles that have been encountered along the way. And it is within this reflection that the true significance of the outcome becomes apparent, because it demonstrates that justice, while achievable, is not always immediate, and that the conditions under which it is pursued can influence both its form and its impact. As the proceedings conclude and the legal determinations are made, the case transitions once again, moving from the structured environment of the courtroom into the broader sphere of public understanding, where its implications continue to be examined and its lessons considered. And it is at this point that the narrative begins to shift from one of resolution to one of reflection, from the question of what has been decided to the question of what those decisions mean. The convictions achieved in the case of Stephen Lawrence provide a measure of closure, but they do not fully resolve the issues that the case has brought to light, nor do they eliminate the need for continued examination of the factors that contributed to the delay in reaching this outcome. And it is this ongoing relevance that ensures the case remains a significant point of reference within discussions of justice. Accountability and the role of institutions in addressing acts of violence motivated by hatred. When the legal proceedings in the case of Stephen Lawrence reached their conclusion, the formal structure of the justice system had, at last, delivered a measure of accountability. Yet the end of trial does not mark the end of a case like this, because what remains is not only the outcome, but the impact of everything that preceded it. And within the United Kingdom, that impact would prove to be both profound and enduring, extending far beyond the boundaries of the courtroom into the broader fabric of society. The immediate sense of resolution, however partial, exists alongside a deeper recognition that the path to that resolution was marked by significant failures. And it is within this tension between outcome and process that the lasting significance of the case begins to take shape. The investigation into the killing of Stephen Lawrence exposed weaknesses that could not be dismissed as isolated errors, revealing instead a pattern of inefficiency and procedural inadequacy that raised fundamental questions about the reliability of the systems responsible for delivering justice. And these questions did not remain confined to the specifics of the case. They expanded outward, prompting a broader examination of how investigations are conducted, how decisions are made, and how accountability is pursued when those systems do not function as intended. Central to this examination was the issue of bias, particularly the role that racial prejudice may have played in shaping the course of the investigation. And while the details of such influence are complex and often difficult to quantify, the perception that it existed had a significant effect on public trust, because trust in any system depends not only on its outcomes, but on the belief that those outcomes are achieved through fair and impartial processes. In this instance, that belief was challenged, and the challenge itself became a defining element of the case's legacy, influencing the way it was discussed, analyzed, and remembered. The recognition of these issues did not emerge in isolation. It was the result of sustained attention, driven in large part by the persistence of the family of Stephen Lawrence, whose refusal to accept the initial shortcomings of the investigation ensured that the case remained visible, that its unresolved questions continued to demand answers, and that the broader implications of those questions could not be ignored. Their role in this process cannot be overstated, because it illustrates the capacity of individuals to influence institutional outcomes, to transform what might otherwise have been a closed case into a catalyst for change, and in doing so, to redefine the relationship between the public and the systems designed to serve it. Over time, the case came to be understood not only as an instance of delayed justice, but as a turning point, a moment at which the limitations of existing practices were brought into focus and the need for reform became increasingly apparent. And while the specifics of those reforms extend beyond the immediate details of the case, their impetus can be traced directly to the issues it revealed. This connection between event and response is a key aspect of the case's enduring relevance, because it demonstrates how a single incident, when examined closely enough, can illuminate broader patterns and prompt changes that affect future outcomes. At the same time, it is important to recognize that such changes do not erase the original harm, nor do they fully compensate for the time during which justice was absent. And this is perhaps one of the most challenging aspects of reflecting on the case, because it requires holding two realities simultaneously: the acknowledgement that progress has been made and the understanding that this progress came at a cost that cannot be undone. The concept of delayed justice, which has been central to the narrative from the outset, continues to resonate in this final stage, not as a temporary condition, but as a lasting feature of the case's legacy, shaping the way it is interpreted and the lessons that are drawn from it. For the family of Stephen Lawrence, The passage of time between the event and the outcome represents more than a procedural delay. It is a period marked by uncertainty, by the absence of closure, and by the ongoing effort to ensure that the case remain a priority. And even with the eventual convictions, that period cannot be separated from the overall experience, because it defines the context in which the outcome is understood. Beyond the immediate circle of those directly affected, the case has influenced public discourse in significant ways, contributing to a heightened awareness of the challenges associated with addressing crimes motivated by hatred and the importance of ensuring that investigative processes are both effective and equitable. And in doing so, it has become a reference point for discussions about accountability, fairness, and the role of institutions in maintaining public confidence. The fact that the case continues to be examined and referenced years after its conclusion speaks to the depth of its impact, because it suggests that the questions it raises have not been fully resolved, that they remain relevant in ongoing conversations about how justice is defined and delivered. In this sense, the legacy of Stephen Lawrence is not confined to the specifics of the case, but extends into the broader landscape of social and institutional change, influencing the way similar cases are approached and the expectations that are placed on those responsible for investigating them. Yet even as the case assumes this broader significance, it is essential to maintain a clear focus on its origin, on the individual whose life was lost and whose name continues to anchor the narrative. Because without that focus, the discussion risks becoming detached from the reality that gives it meaning. The story does not begin with systemic failure or end with reform. It begins with a young man whose life was taken in an act of violence that should never have occurred. And everything that follows, every investigation, every proceeding, every reflection, derives its importance from that fact. As the narrative reaches its conclusion, it does so without offering a simple resolution, because the case itself resists such simplification, instead presenting a complex interplay of events and responses that cannot be reduced to a single outcome or lesson. And it is within this complexity that its enduring significance lies. The case of Stephen Lawrence remains, ultimately, a reminder that justice is not only about what is decided, but about how those decisions are reached, that the integrity of a system is measured not only by its ability to produce outcomes, but by the fairness and effectiveness of the processes that lead to them, and that when those processes fall short, the consequences extend far beyond a single case, shaping perceptions, influencing trust, and prompting the kind of reflection that, while difficult, is necessary for progress. Long after the courtrooms fall silent and the formal language of legal proceedings gives way to the quieter rhythms of everyday life, some cases continue to exist not as resolved events, but as enduring presences within collective memory. And the case of Stephen Lawrence is one such presence, anchored in 1993, yet never fully confined to it, extending forward through time as both a record of what happened and a reflection of what was revealed in its aftermath. In the United Kingdom, the name itself has come to signify more than an individual, though it must always return to that origin, to the life that was interrupted in London. Because without that grounding, the meaning of the case risks becoming abstract, detached from the reality that gives it purpose. The epilogue of this story is not defined by new evidence or dramatic revelations, but by the persistence of questions that do not fade with time. Questions that remain relevant precisely because they are not limited to the specifics of a single investigation, but instead speak to broader considerations about justice, responsibility, and the systems designed to uphold them. What does it mean for justice to be delayed? And how does that delay shape its value? How should a system respond when it recognizes that it has failed, not in intention, but in execution? And perhaps most importantly, What responsibilities remain after accountability has been formally established? These questions do not have simple answers, and the absence of simplicity is itself a defining feature of the case's legacy, because it ensures that the discussion surrounding it continues, evolving as new perspectives are brought to bear on the same set of facts. One of the most striking aspects of this ongoing reflection is the way in which the case resists closure in a conventional sense. While the legal outcome provides a measure of resolution, it does not eliminate the complexities that have defined the narrative from the beginning, nor does it fully reconcile the tension between the eventual achievement of accountability and the earlier period of inaction that made such achievement necessary. This tension is not something to be resolved. It is something to be acknowledged, because it represents the reality of how the case unfolded. And any attempt to simplify it would risk obscuring the lessons it offers. In this way, the case functions as both a historical record and a point of reference, a means of understanding not only what occurred, but how similar situations might be approached in the future. And it is in this forward-looking dimension that its significance becomes most apparent. The recognition of systemic shortcomings within the investigation has prompted reflection on the structures and practices that govern such processes, encouraging a more critical examination of how evidence is gathered, how decisions are made, and how accountability is pursued when initial efforts fall short. And while these reflections are not unique to this case, they are given particular urgency by the clarity with which the issues were exposed. At the same time, the case continues to influence the way in which society understands the impact of violence motivated by hatred, highlighting not only the immediate harm caused by such acts, but also the broader implications for communities and institutions, and reinforcing the importance of addressing both the actions themselves and the conditions that allow them to occur. This dual focus on the specific and the systemic ensures that the case remains relevant, not as a static example, but as a dynamic point of engagement, one that invites ongoing consideration rather than final judgment. For those who return to the case, whether as part of professional inquiry or personal reflection, there is often a sense that it occupies a space between resolution and uncertainty, between what is known and what remains open to interpretation. And it is within this space that its enduring power resides. The story of Stephen Lawrence does not conclude with a definitive statement. It continues through the questions it raises and the conversations it sustains, serving as a reminder that the pursuit of justice is not always linear, that it can involve setbacks and revisions as well as progress, and that its outcomes are shaped not only by the facts of a case, but by the processes through which those facts are examined and understood. In reflecting on what remains, it is essential to maintain a balance between acknowledgement and forward movement, to recognize the significance of what has been achieved while also considering what still needs to be addressed. And this balance is perhaps the most challenging aspect of engaging with the case, because it requires an acceptance of complexity, a willingness to hold multiple perspectives simultaneously without forcing them into a single, simplified narrative. The legacy of Stephen Lawrence is not defined by a single outcome or a singular interpretation. It is defined by the ongoing interaction between past events and present understanding, by the way in which a moment in 1993 continues to inform discussions about justice, accountability, and the role of institutions in responding to acts of violence. And so the epilogue does not close the story, it extends it, carrying forward the weight of what happened and the responsibility to learn from it, ensuring that the case remains not only a part of history, but a part of the continuing effort to understand and improve the systems that shape our collective experience. As the years pass and the immediacy of events gives way to reflection, certain cases begin to occupy a space that is neither entirely historical nor entirely present. And the story of Stephen Lawrence is one that continues to exist in that space. Not simply as a record of what happened in 1993 in London, but as an evolving reference point through which broader questions are examined, questioned, and revisited over time. The passage of time does not diminish the significance of the case. Rather, it alters the way in which that significance is understood, shifting the focus from the immediate facts toward the implications that extend outward from them. And in doing so, it reveals the extent to which a single event can influence not only those directly connected to it, but also the structures and perceptions that shape a society's understanding of justice. In the context of the United Kingdom, this case has come to represent more than the sum of its parts, not because its details are expanded beyond what is known, but because those details resonate within a broader framework of concerns that continue to be relevant. One of the most significant aspects of this extended reflection is the way in which the case challenges assumptions about how systems are expected to function. There is a general expectation that investigations proceed with efficiency, that evidence is collected and evaluated with precision, and that the transition from incident to accountability follows a clear and structured path. Yet the trajectory of this case demonstrates that such expectations are not always met, and that when they're not, the consequences can be both immediate and long-lasting. This realization does not exist in isolation. It interacts with a broader understanding of institutional responsibility, prompting a reconsideration of what it means for a system to be effective and how that effectiveness should be measured. It raises questions about the balance between process and outcome, about whether the eventual achievement of accountability can fully compensate for earlier failures, and about how those failures should be addressed in order to prevent their recurrence. These questions are not unique to this case, but they are given particular clarity by it, because the sequence of events provides a concrete example of how such issues can manifest and what their impact can be. At the same time, the case continues to influence the way in which society understands the role of persistence in the pursuit of justice. The sustained efforts of the family of Stephen Lawrence serve as a reminder that accountability is not always achieved through institutional processes alone, that it can require external pressure, continued attention, and a refusal to accept incomplete answers. And this dynamic introduces an important dimension to the narrative, one that highlights the interaction between individuals and systems, and the ways in which that interaction can shape outcomes. It also raises questions about equity, about whether all cases receive the same level of attention and persistence, and about what factors influence the degree to which a case remains visible within public and institutional consciousness. These considerations extend the relevance of the case beyond its immediate context, connecting it to broader discussions about access to justice and the conditions under which it is pursued. Another important aspect of the case's extended reflection is its impact on the understanding of violence motivated by hatred, particularly the way in which such violence is recognized, interpreted, and addressed. The identification of a racial motive in the killing of Stephen Lawrence situates the case within a wider conversation about the presence and consequences of prejudice, and it underscores the importance of acknowledging and confronting such motives when they are present, because failure to do so can obscure the nature of the act and hinder the effectiveness of the response. This recognition has implications not only for individual cases, but for the broader approach to addressing similar incidents, influencing the way in which they're investigated, prosecuted, and discussed within society. It also contributes to a deeper understanding of the ways in which social context can shape both behavior and perception, highlighting the need for awareness that extends beyond the immediate circumstances of any given event. As the case continues to be examined, It also serves as a point of connection between different fields of inquiry, including law, sociology, and public policy, each of which brings its own perspective to the analysis, and each of which contributes to a more comprehensive understanding of what the case represents. This interdisciplinary engagement is a testament to the complexity of the issues involved, because it reflects the recognition that no single framework is sufficient to fully account for the dynamics at play, and that a more complete understanding requires the integration of multiple viewpoints. Within this process, the case functions as both a subject of study and a catalyst for discussion, prompting questions that extend beyond its immediate details and into the broader considerations of how societies respond to acts of violence and how they seek to prevent them. Yet despite this expansion of scope, it is essential to maintain a clear connection to the original event, to the moment in which a young man's life was taken, because it is this moment that grounds all subsequent reflection, ensuring that the discussion remains anchored in the reality that gives it meaning. The risk in extended reflection is that the case becomes abstract, that it is discussed in terms of concepts and implications without sufficient attention to the human element that underlies it. And avoiding this risk requires a deliberate effort to keep that element at the center of the narrative. The story of Stephen Lawrence is not only a case study or a reference point. It is a reminder of the impact that a single act of violence can have, not only on those directly affected, but on the systems and communities that respond to it. And it is this dual nature that ensures its continued relevance. In the end, the extended reflection does not provide a final answer or a definitive interpretation, because the case itself resists such closure, instead offering a set of insights that remain open to examination, that continue to inform discussions about justice, responsibility, and the role of institutions in addressing acts of violence. And it is in this openness that its enduring significance lies, not as a closed chapter, but as an ongoing conversation, one that invites continued engagement and reflection, and one that ensures that the lessons of the past remain connected to the challenges of the present. In the end, when every stage of the case has been examined, from the quiet normalcy of that evening in 1993 to the sudden violence, to the failures and eventual outcomes that followed, what remains is not a single, clean resolution, but a layered understanding of how justice unfolds when it is tested, delayed, and ultimately pursued with persistence. And the story of Stephen Lawrence becomes less about a singular conclusion and more about the enduring questions it leaves behind within United Kingdom and beyond. There's a natural human inclination to seek closure, to look at a case and identify the moment at which it is complete, the point at which all necessary answers have been provided and all responsibilities assigned. But in this instance, that inclination is challenged by the reality that while some accountability was achieved, the path to that outcome complicates the meaning of justice itself, because justice is not only defined by what is decided in a courtroom, but by the processes that lead to those decisions. And when those processes falter, the impact extends beyond the immediate case into the broader perception of how systems function and whom they serve. The killing of Stephen Lawrence forces a confrontation with this complexity, asking not only whether justice was eventually delivered, but whether the manner of its delivery meets the expectations that society places upon its institutions. And this question does not yield a simple answer, because it requires balancing the recognition of eventual outcomes with the acknowledgement of earlier shortcomings. It is within this balance that the case continues to resonate, not as an example of failure alone, nor as a straightforward success, but as a combination of both, illustrating that justice can be both achieved and compromised within the same narrative. The passage of time plays a crucial role in shaping this understanding, because it creates distance between the event and its resolution, allowing for reflection while also emphasizing the cost of delay. And that cost is not measured solely in procedural terms, but in the lived experience of those who waited, who sought answers, and who refused to allow the case to fade into obscurity. Their persistence becomes an integral part of the story, not as an addition to the formal process, but as a force that influenced its direction, demonstrating that justice is not always a passive outcome of institutional action, but can require sustained engagement from those who demand it. This dynamic introduces a broader consideration of responsibility, extending it beyond the individuals directly involved in the crime to include the systems that respond to it and the society that observes and evaluates that response. It raises the question of how responsibility is distributed, how it is acknowledged, and how it is addressed when it is found to be insufficient. And these questions do not end with the case itself. They continue to inform the way similar situations are approached in the future, shaping expectations and influencing reforms. The legacy of Stephen Lawrence is therefore not confined to the specifics of the case, but exists within this broader framework of ongoing evaluation, where each aspect of the narrative contributes to a deeper understanding of what justice requires and what it leaves behind when it is pursued under imperfect conditions. At the same time, it is essential to return to the individual at the center of the case, because without that focus, the discussion risks becoming detached from the reality that gives it meaning, and the name Stephen Lawrence remains a reminder that behind every analysis, every reflection, and every conclusion, there is a life that was taken, a future that was interrupted, and a moment that cannot be undone. This return to the individual does not negate the broader implications of the case. Rather, it anchors them, ensuring that they remain connected to the human impact that justifies their importance. As the narrative reaches its final stage, it does so not with a definitive statement, but with an acknowledgement of complexity, an acceptance that some cases cannot be fully resolved in the way we might hope, and that their value lies not in providing clear answers, but in prompting continued reflection and improvement. The story does not end with certainty, it ends with awareness, with the understanding that justice is an ongoing process, one that must be continually examined and refined, and that the lessons drawn from this case are not static, but evolving, shaped by the ways in which they are interpreted and applied over time. In this sense, the final reflection is not a conclusion, but a continuation, a recognition that the impact of the case extends beyond its immediate boundaries and into the ongoing effort to ensure that the systems designed to protect and serve are capable of fulfilling that role with fairness, consistency, and integrity. And so, what justice leaves behind is not only the record of what was decided, but the responsibility to learn from what was revealed, to acknowledge both the achievements and the shortcomings, and to carry those lessons forward in the pursuit of a more effective and equitable system, one in which the distance between expectation and reality is not defined by failure, but by the capacity to recognize and correct it when a case reaches its final telling. There is often an expectation that the narrative will settle into a kind of stillness, that the act of recounting events will create a sense of completion. Yet with the story of Stephen Lawrence, that stillness is not an absence of movement, but a space filled with reflection, where the weight of what has been told continues to resonate long after the details have been laid out. And in United Kingdom, that resonance has never fully faded, because the case does not belong solely to the past. It exists in the ongoing dialogue about justice, responsibility, and the capacity of institutions to respond when those principles are tested. The closing of this narrative does not seek to summarize what has already been established, nor does it attempt to impose a final interpretation on events that remain complex and layered. Instead, It acknowledges that some stories resist neat conclusions, not because they lack clarity, but because their significance extends beyond the boundaries of a single account. The killing of Stephen Lawrence was an event defined by its suddenness and its cruelty, but the story that followed transformed it into something larger, something that continues to shape understanding and provoke reflection. And it is within this transformation that the true meaning of the case can be found. There is a quiet tension that exists at the end of such narratives, a recognition that while the sequence of events has been traced from beginning to outcome, the implications of those events remain active, continuing to influence how similar situations are perceived and addressed. And this tension is not something to be resolved, but something to be carried forward, because it represents the connection between what has happened and what may happen in the future. In considering what remains after the story has been told, it is necessary to look beyond the specifics of the case and toward the broader patterns it reveals, patterns that speak to the challenges of ensuring fairness, the importance of effective investigation, and the role of persistence in the pursuit of accountability. And while these patterns are not unique to this case, they're illuminated by it in ways that make them difficult to ignore. The narrative has shown that justice is not a static concept, but a process that unfolds over time, influenced by the actions of individuals, the decisions of institutions, and the pressures exerted by society. And it is within this process that both its strengths and its vulnerabilities become visible. The story of Stephen Lawrence reveals that even when systems are designed with the intention of fairness, their effectiveness depends on how they are applied, and when that application falls short, the consequences can extend far beyond the immediate case, shaping perceptions and influencing trust in ways that are not easily repaired. Yet it also demonstrates that those systems are not entirely fixed, that they can respond to scrutiny, adapt to criticism, and, over time, move toward greater accountability. And it is this capacity for change that offers a measure of cautious optimism within an otherwise difficult narrative. At the same time, it is important to recognize that change does not erase what has already occurred, and that the progress prompted by the case exists alongside the reality of the loss that initiated it, a reality that remains constant regardless of the developments that follow. The name Stephen Lawrence continues to carry this dual significance, representing both the individual whose life was taken and the broader impact of the case that bears his name. And maintaining this duality is essential to understanding the full scope of the story, because it ensures that the discussion remains grounded in the human experience while also acknowledging the systemic implications. As the narrative draws to a close, it does so with an awareness that the act of telling the story is itself part of its legacy, that each retelling contributes to the ongoing process of reflection and understanding, and that in preserving the details of what happened, it helps to ensure that the lessons of the case are not lost to time. This preservation is not about maintaining a sense of tragedy for its own sake, but about recognizing the importance of memory in shaping future action. Because it is through memory that patterns are identified, that mistakes are acknowledged, and that improvements are made. The silence that follows the story, therefore, is not empty. It is filled with the echoes of what has been learned and the questions that remain. And it invites those who have listened to consider not only what has been said, but what it means, both in the context of this case and in the broader landscape of justice and society. There is no final statement that can encapsulate all aspects of the story, no single conclusion that can resolve its complexities, but there is a clear understanding that what has been revealed carries a responsibility to continue examining the systems that shape outcomes, to remain attentive to the ways in which they can succeed or fail, and to ensure that the pursuit of justice remains active rather than assumed. And so, the closing is not an end, but a continuation, a recognition that while the narrative has reached its final point, the impact of the case endures. Carried forward in the conversations it inspires and the changes it influences, ensuring that the story of Stephen Lawrence remains not only a part of history, but a part of the ongoing effort to understand and improve the world in which such events occur. The case of Stephen Lawrence remains one of the most significant criminal justice milestones in the United Kingdom because its legacy is not defined only by what happened in 1993 in London, but by what it exposed about institutional processes over the following years. One of the most enduring documented impacts is the formal acknowledgement that the initial police investigation failed in key respects, particularly in how evidence was handled, how lines of inquiry were prioritized, and how effectively the early stages of the case were managed. This acknowledgement was not symbolic. It led to structured review processes and contributed to changes in policing standards, especially in how serious violent crimes and racially motivated incidents are approached. The case became a reference point for institutional learning, used in training and policy discussions to illustrate how investigative shortcomings can have long-term consequences that extend far beyond the immediate timeline of a crime. Another key documented aspect of the case is its role in shaping national awareness of how bias can affect investigative outcomes. While the case itself is not reduced solely to this issue, official reviews and public discourse recognized that perceptions and assumptions during investigations can influence decision-making pathways. And this recognition contributed to broader reforms aimed at improving accountability and oversight within policing structures. These reforms are part of the case's measurable legacy, reflecting how a single investigation can lead to systemic reassessment when its failures are thoroughly examined. At the same time, the case also stands as a clear example of how justice can be delayed even when eventual outcomes are achieved. The passage of time between the crime and later legal accountability created a gap that affected evidence availability, witness reliability, and procedural continuity, illustrating how delays in investigative effectiveness can permanently shape the trajectory of a case. This delay is not just a procedural detail. It is a central part of the case's meaning, because it demonstrates that justice is not only about whether accountability is eventually reached, but also about when and how it is achieved. The role of the Lawrence family is also a documented and essential part of the case's history. Their sustained pursuit of answers ensured that the case remained active in public and institutional awareness, preventing it from becoming static or forgotten. This persistence is consistently recognized in official accounts as a contributing factor to the eventual reopening and reconsideration of the case, showing how external advocacy can intersect with institutional processes over time. Importantly, the case also influenced public expectations of policing transparency and accountability, contributing to a broader cultural shift in how investigative integrity is discussed in the United Kingdom. While no single case is solely responsible for systemic change, this case is widely cited as a catalyst in that evolution because of the clarity with which its shortcomings were identified and addressed. Even with these developments, the case does not resolve into simplicity. It remains a layered example of how justice systems operate under pressure, how failures can persist without intervention, and how correction, when it occurs, often arrives long after the harm has been done. The name Stephen Lawrence continues to function as both a memorial and a reference point in legal and institutional contexts, representing not only a life lost, but also a turning point in how investigative standards are understood and applied. In closing, what this extended reflection confirms is that the case does not require fictional continuation to remain significant. Its documented legacy is already substantial. It exists as a record of harm, a record of institutional failure, and a record of reform, all at once. And within that combination lies its lasting importance, not as an unresolved story, but as a permanently instructive one, continuing to shape how justice is evaluated, questioned, and improved in the systems that govern it. The case of Stephen Lawrence in London remains fully defined by what is already established in the historical and institutional record within United Kingdom. A racially motivated killing in 1993, an initially flawed investigation, prolonged failure to secure early accountability, and later institutional reassessment that led to significant changes in policing practice and investigative standards. There is no additional factual next chapter beyond this framework that can be responsibly added. Without moving into speculation, what remains instead is the long-term documented legacy, which continues to be referenced in law enforcement training, policy discussions, and public discourse about justice system accountability. The case is frequently cited as a defining example of how investigative processes can fail at multiple levels: operational, procedural, and cultural, and how those failures can delay justice even when the underlying facts of a crime are not in doubt. It also remains central to discussions about the importance of impartiality in investigations, particularly in cases where bias, whether explicit or implicit, can affect decision-making and the direction of early inquiries. The recognition of these issues did not arise immediately, but developed over time through formal reviews and sustained public scrutiny, demonstrating how institutional learning often occurs only after significant external pressure and reflection. Another enduring aspect of the case is its role in shaping expectations around accountability, both for individual perpetrators and for institutions responsible for delivering justice. In the years following the case, its name became associated not only with the crime itself, but with broader questions about trust in policing and the mechanisms required to maintain that trust. Within official frameworks in the United Kingdom, the case contributed to a shift toward more structured oversight and clearer standards for handling serious violent crime investigations, particularly those involving hate-motivated elements. However, even these reforms do not transform the case into a closed narrative in the emotional or social sense, because the impact of the events continues to exist independently of legal resolution. The death of Stephen Lawrence remains the central and unchanging fact around which all later developments are organized, and it is this fact that anchors the case in public memory. Everything that followed, the inquiries, the institutional critiques, the policy changes, derives its meaning from that original event and the recognition that the initial response was insufficient. Importantly, the case also illustrates a structural reality of justice systems. That correction is possible, but often delayed, and that delayed correction carries its own consequences, including diminished evidentiary clarity and prolonged absence of closure for those affected. The Lawrence family's sustained engagement with the process is widely acknowledged in official accounts as a significant factor in ensuring that the case remained active within institutional awareness, highlighting how persistence outside formal structures can influence outcomes within them. Yet even with eventual legal accountability achieved for some of those responsible, the case does not resolve into full completion, because the passage of time itself becomes part of its meaning. It demonstrates that justice is not a single moment, but a sequence of actions and inactions spread across years, and that evaluating it requires attention to both results and process. In that sense, the case remains a permanent reference point rather than a finished story. It continues to be studied, not because it evolves into new events, but because its existing record contains enough complexity to inform ongoing discussions about fairness, institutional responsibility, and the limits of delayed justice. There is no factual Part 12 beyond this. Because the finality of the case is not narrative but historical, what occurred has been documented, reviewed, and integrated into institutional knowledge. What remains is interpretation, reflection, and application of its lessons, not expansion of its timeline.